Hello, I'm a man in my 40s raising my children in an ordinary family. It's said that a suffering child grows up quickly. Perhaps that applies to me. I learned early on how to put up with sadness, like a child adult while growing up. What made me mature so early happened when I was 5 years old. I asked my grandma, why don't I have a mom and dad like other kids? In kindergarten, unlike me, my friends were picked up by their mom or dad. As I watched them, I wondered, and my grandma answered me. They went far away to America to make money. But my grandma's expression was grim, looking at me like a pitiful puppy. Moreover, her eyes were filled with tears that was about to fall. From that day on, I never asked my grandma again about my parents. I knew my question hurt my grandma. Besides, I noticed that it was a lie. So, rather than asking about my mom and dad, I looked for my parents' photos, going through the album on my own. Secretly, I looked for my parents' photos and found one that seemed to be my mom and dad. I took it out of the album and hid it in my closet to look at it away from my grandma. Even though my grandparents loved me, it was hard to accept the fact that I was the only one without parents unlike my friends. That made me feel lonely for a young child, and the feeling followed me like a shadow. I struggled to dismiss it, but I couldn't. I tried earnest to erase the curiosity about my parents, but those words were forbidden at home, which was a big burden for a little child. But my longing for my mom and dad made me feel depressed all my life. Then, one day, I was eating lunch with my friends when a strand of my grandma's hair came out of my food. Then, the class president shouted, "Hey, your food is so dirty. That's why we shouldn't eat with children who don't have mothers." Then, he pushed my lunch off the table. I lost my temper at his words and punched him. Blood dripped from his nose. He was a big guy, but he burst into tears when he saw his nose bleed. Ignoring that, I yelled to the class, "If anyone mentions in front of me that I don't have mom and dad, I'll beat you to death, just like this prick." Because of that incident, my grandma had to take off in the middle of her work as the school summoned her. Oh my gosh, because I was working in a restaurant, I didn't pay much attention to our dough one. This is what happened. I'm really sorry. How startled you must have been. I will teach him better from now on. As my grandma tried hard to allay that woman's feelings, my grandma's back looked so small and pitiful. Since then, I endured all the taunts for being an orphan by forcing me to remember that image. If I retaliated by punching them, I might feel better, but it would break my grandma's heart. I began studying and working out diligently so I would no longer be teased for being an orphan, and not to let it kill my spirit. I wanted to show to the people that I could grow up as a fine person despite being raised by my grandma. Then, one day, a big change came to my life. Suddenly, I had to live together with my uncle's family. My uncle, whose successful business went bankrupt, had to sell even his house and move in with us. Overnight, my room disappeared, and my desk was moved to the veranda. After they moved in, I started to feel like a stranger, which I had never felt while living with my grandparents. It was as if I shouldn't be living in this house. "Mom, why is Doan still living here? Send him now to sister. Isn't she running a large restaurant in the US?" I overheard my uncle arguing with my grandma in the bedroom. I was shocked. I had guessed that my parents had passed away, but I had a mother living in the United States. "She has just gotten settled now. She has a child too. So how could she take Doan that easily? She has been sending money to support Doan, so I'm not spending my own money. So don't act so mean to him." After I heard their conversation, I quietly came out of the house and ran around the schoolyard, trying to organize my confused thoughts. My mother, who I considered dead, was actually living in the US, sending money for me, and my uncle wishes to send me out of the house. I somehow knew instinctively that my uncle had considered me to be a burden on his mother. But when I heard it for myself, I felt terrible. Although my parents were not around, I felt my grandparents were like my own mom and dad. But now I felt abandoned, all alone, after my uncle came. Why didn't my mom take me with her and left me with my grandma? If my mom did not send any money, wouldn't my grandma take care of me? The thoughts continued, but I couldn't find the answer. Then, I suddenly started to become ill. I felt as if someone was pressing my neck, and I couldn't get up. I also had a horrible headache, as if someone was stabbing in my head. I was a good student, but because I couldn't fill the required number of attendance days, I was on the verge of not being able to graduate. I kept leaving school early and had to just lie in bed. My uncle's wife came into the room and looked pathetically at me, sneering, "Are you sick again?" When I could no longer do any housework, my uncle came into my room, nagging and complaining that his wife had to take over my chores. My grandpa yelled at me for being weak and that I won't be able to survive in this world as a male. Also for making them waste money on medical bills. Every day was hell for me. I even thought of committing suicide for the first time in my life, thinking I could escape from all the suffering. It was frustrating because the hospital said I had no problem, but as if a ghost possessed me, my body shook so much from pain. I had set my goals high to attend a university in Seoul by getting good grades, but this sudden illness was destroying my dream. One day, I got permission to leave school early from my homeroom teacher and collapsed in my room sleeping when I heard a voice muttering, "Dear God, please pity our Doan and heal him. Dear Buddha, please let me be sick instead of our Doan." My grandma, who was an atheist, was summoning God and Buddha, praying in tears for me. When I opened my eyes slightly, I saw her sunken face. I later heard from my aunt that my grandma fasted to pray for me, even though she was working hard in the restaurant. From praying and fasting, she collapsed several times, getting weak from overworking. I pretended to sleep while listening to my grandma's prayer for me every day, which melted all the loneliness I had in my heart. Miraculously, I was able to recover after a month to attend school. Of course, even after that, my uncle's unhappy looks made me cower, but I clenched my teeth and studied late into the night, on the desk in the balcony, or in the bathroom, maintaining top grades in school. I couldn't go to a private academy due to lack of money, but I studied hard by being friends with those who had high grades to ask questions. I wanted to succeed to repay my grandma for her suffering because of me. When my mother came back from the US to see me, I wanted to take her revenge by showing her that I grew up successfully, even if I didn't have a mother. That moment of revenge came sooner than I thought. When I was a senior in high school, my mom came home to see me. She was exactly the same as in the photo I saw. My mom cried continuously, apologizing and complimenting me that I grew up well. She said that when my father suddenly died in an accident, she was helpless, and whenever she tried to take her own life several times, my stepdad, who was in love with my mother, stood by her side and was of big help. Because her new husband refused to have me with them, she had no choice but to leave me at her mother's house and go to the US. I had resented my mom so much, but as soon as I saw her face, my resentment disappeared, and I just felt sorry for my mom's harsh situation, sending money to support me despite her own circumstances. I gave your grandpa $30,000 to use it as your tuition, so don't worry about money and just study hard to go to the college you want. My mother sobbed so much, and then she returned to the US. I studied very hard and was accepted at the university I wanted to attend. However, I heard a shocking story after I got accepted to college. What? Grandpa, what are you talking about? Why don't you have my money? My grandpa had given my uncle $30,000 that my mom left him as my college tuition for my uncle's business. That was the money for me to go to college. In what right did you give that money to uncle? I studied so hard to go to the college. You never gave me any spending money, so I had no money to buy clothes and only wore my school uniform around. I had no money for snacks, and I got them from my friends. That's how hard I lived. Then, why are you taking even that money away? My grandpa, who just stood at a corner smoking without any words, scolded me. You are an ungrateful bastard. Why is that your tuition money? Don't you know how much it took to raise you? If it weren't for me, you would have ended up in an orphanage. Then you should have sent me to the orphanage. Then I wouldn't have to be mistreated by uncle and could have entered the college. I felt so indignant for living such a diligent life in vain that I poured out all my resentment and tried to leave the house. However, my grandma held my hands, sobbing at my leaving without any money. Do-won, I'm sorry. I will try to get the money somehow. So, for now. At that time, I even resented my grandma and coldly pushed her away. Never mind, you also think more of your own son rather than me. I will just give up on that $30,000 as a payment for raising me. I will never see you again. Have a good life. Then I packed up. Grandpa was enraged at my attitude, and I spat harsh words at my grandpa and left the house and headed to a motel. On the way to the motel, I saw affectionate families and couples that made me cry endlessly. I wondered why I had no one by my side, without anyone who truly loved me. I had all kinds of negative thoughts, including whether I had committed a great sin in my past life. The fact that people I considered as my parents did not love me was more painful than the fact that I couldn't enter the college that I wanted. I was so miserable that I gulped down soju that I bought at the convenience store. Then I saw a few gold rings in my bag. I didn't pack them, so I guessed that my grandma must have put them there secretly. My grandma probably only had these gold rings she kept for emergency and gave them to me who was leaving without any money. I suddenly missed my grandma, but I clenched my teeth to take hold of myself. Don't be tricked. Grandma just took care of me because she didn't want her daughter to suffer. Don't be swayed. I sold the gold rings for my immediate needs in the meantime. I gave up the college that I wanted to be in and entered a technical college to learn the skills for a job and get a scholarship. After graduating, I was hired as a radiologist at a university hospital. I also met my wife, who was a nurse there. She had lots of laughs and was kind to everyone. I was always wary of people and drew a line, but she charmed me with her kind smiles. She made me smile when I was blunt and cold. Aren't you going to marry me? Why aren't you introducing me to your family? She grew up happily in a middle-class family. To her, it was strange that I would never talk about my own family. Even at work, our marriage was taken for granted, so it was natural to talk about each other's family before we got married. But after I left the house, I had never contacted my grandma, so I had no news about her. If I hear news about my grandparents, I felt that it would be like returning to my painful past. So, just before my wedding, I called my mother in the US. My mom told me an unexpected news. Grandpa had Parkinson's disease for a long time, and Grandma collapsed after taking care of him by herself. My grandma was in a nursing home, and she had Alzheimer's disease and was close to the end of her life. When I heard it, I felt my head got hit and felt dazed. I didn't even get to tell my mom about my marriage and fell on my knees, sobbing after hanging up the phone. I had hated them so much that I didn't contact them for a long time, but hearing their news, I regretted my act and felt like I had betrayed them. I took a leave of absence from my work and headed to the nursing home where they were. I found my grandma asleep in a hospital room where the smell of excrement and urine permeated. Trembling, I approached her. "Grandma, this is Doan. Can you recognize me?" Then she barely opened her eyes at the sound of my voice. For a moment, she made an expression, wondering if it was a dream. Then she smiled slowly. How would I not recognize my grandson? I even left the door open every day in case you would come, she said and stroked my face with her hands. She opened her eyes wide and told me to come closer to her. Then she whispered in my ears, "The password is your birthday. I secretly left it in my red jacket away from your uncle, so you must take it. With that, study as you want. It's this grandma's wish." She mumbled on what I couldn't understand. I wanted to talk more, but her caregiver said her condition was not good and that she had to rest. After I checked that she was asleep, I headed to my grandpa's ward. "Oh, are you the grandson? Where are your mom and dad? How about other family members? As soon as the caregiver saw me, she asked. After my grandpa was hospitalized, she said my uncle only came once and had never come since. Even though there's a caregiver, the kids stop from time to time to give snacks and provide other needed things. But why isn't there anyone who visits this grandfather? At the words of the caregiver, I took out the prepared envelope filled with money and handed over to her and said, I live too far, so I won't be able to come often. On my behalf, please take care of him. Oh my, I didn't say that to get something like this, but I'll take care of him well. The caregiver took the envelope and left to give us privacy. I looked at my grandfather's face quietly. His face had become noticeably thin and old in the past 10 years. His hands were tied up because he constantly scratched his body with his fingernails, complaining of itchiness. My grandpa recognized me and begged me to untie his hands. Hiding from the caregiver's eyes when I untied him, with a relieved expression on his face, he said in a trembling voice, Did you hate this grandpa that much that you never contact us? I'm sorry. Your uncle found out that your mom left me with that money and begged me to help him just once, so I gave in. He was sobbing for many days, so I must have been crazy to do it. But don't resent your grandma. Since you left, she had never slept comfortably, even for a day. To make your tuition, she worked overtime and saved money diligently. She seemed to save the money in the bank every day, but she never told me nor your uncle the whereabouts of the bank book. She said that the bank book will have to be given to you when you return. Grandpa sobbed. I feel so sorry for your grandma. She suffered all her life, and now she's going to die. I said nothing and just clipped his fingernails and left the room. After so many years, I finally went back to my old home. I felt chill from the shabby house without anyone having to live there for a long time. When I entered the room, on the dressing table was a photo of my graduation I took with my grandma. After staring at the picture for a while, I found a red jacket in the closet, as my grandma said. I put my hand in the pocket, and a bank book fell off. When I opened it, the deposit details were stamped. When I saw that, I burst into tears. The details were written as Dowan's college tuition all over. I don't know for how many hours I cried there. My grandma, who knew nothing but kitchen works, must have suffered so much to earn this money. I couldn't even answer my girlfriend's phone calls. The only thing I can do was to get drunk to numb the pain. My grandma passed away without seeing my wedding, and with the money she left, I used it partly to pay for my grandpa's medical bills, and the balance was left for my children. I wanted to show my kids what kind of great-grandmother she was. When my children were grown, I took them to the ossuary. My kids asked me why I cried, looking at my grandma's picture. I received so much love from my grandma, but I only learned that after she passed away. I regret that so much. Then, my eldest son said, I think Grandma would be upset watching you from heaven for her grandson to be a crybaby. I couldn't help but laugh at his trying to talk like a grown-up. I realized my own son had grown up already. As my children grew up, I realized how my grandma must have felt as she raised me. More than ever, I missed my grandma so much. Whenever I missed my grandma, I would visit my grandpa in the nursing home and talk with him about grandma for comfort. Grandma in heaven, please don't worry about the family and only think of yourself. I'm sorry for all that I did. I thank you so much, and rest in peace until we meet again. And I love you.